Well, hello, boys and girls, sports fans and assorted waifs and strays. Welcome to the new abnormal, as I call it, not the new normal. It's Den from Diginomica, and today I have Doctor, very much a doctor, Thomas Otter, but not a doctor like you know, a doctor like I know, who has his own HR advisory firm. Has got an exciting announcement to talk about a little bit later. And hey, dude, apparently Siri didn't get what I just said, so I'm going to just shut Siri down, I think. Well, we all know we're live now, right? Anyway, yeah. Thomas, you're in Germany, I'm in the UK, and you are sporting a very special T-shirt. So please explain that before we go any further.
Yeah, so it's the Monty Python. I'm a big Monty Python fan, and there's a company in the UK called Philosophy Football who do a variety of really cool T-shirts, and this one happens to be the script from the Monty Python Philosopher's Football sketch, which I think is one of the finest pieces of comedy on the planet. So if you don't know it, look it up. It's very, very funny.
Okay, Thomas, what are you seeing in this current abnormal world?
Well, yes, abnormal is probably the word. One of my family members was tested the other day, and luckily came back negative. So that's a big relief. But these are very, very different times, and I think my main advice at the moment is, if you're not an expert in a particular field, then leave that discussion to the experts. If you're not a statistics expert, then don't spend your afternoons making prediction graphs and posting them on the internet, because there are enough people doing that already, probably too many. So that's my first bit of advice. If you're not an expert, don't pretend to be one. So I don't really have any advice from on so many levels for this, because I think we're all making it up. We're making it up as we go along. And I think the people that think they know what they're talking about are probably the ones we need to be most afraid of at the moment. For me, I think it's a case of treading carefully. I think, the obvious things of looking after your people come first. But I think, too much speculation and too much gazing into crystal balls is not going to do it as any good. Yeah.
Well, I've always felt that if you think you can gaze into a crystal ball and do it well, then, please let me know. And I'll get you plenty of money for that.
Yeah.
But this thing. I mean, at the moment, we're all armchair experts to some degree, I suppose.
Yes.
And it does worry me that there is enormous amounts of so-called information, which at the end of the day is probably going to turn out to be misinformation.
Yeah.
And particularly on the question of statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was trained for a period in that particular subject, and I find it very, very difficult to understand which nominators and denominators I need to be thinking about in order to come to any sort of reasonable conclusion. I mean, probably about the best answer that I can give at the moment is we don't know. And because we don't know, perhaps we ought to shut up and listen to people who know better than ourselves. Right. And at the same time, let the medical people lead and the scientific people lead the charge rather than politicians, tech analysts, and other assorted waifs and strays. That's indeed my view anyway.
Yeah, indeed. And look, it's great to have an opinion. But I also think if you have a platform that's powerful in other places, then using it for this may well backfire. So,
sure.
Again, focus what you know. Look, I know a lot about HR technology because that's the field that I've worked in for, nearly 30 years. So, I'll happily argue about HR technology with anybody, but I'm not really in a position to argue about, virus epidemiology or whatever. That's not really my field of expertise. Yeah.
Okay, Thomas, let's turn to the people question, because I'm not an HR person. I'm more a finance guy, as you know. But it seems to me that the HR question should be and is uppermost in many people's minds. It's certainly uppermost in my mind, right?
Yes.
Because when people ask me, said, "Hey, what are you doing?" and the first thing I'm thinking about is, what the heck do I do to help protect my own core people? What do I do to protect my contributors? Can I keep them going? Can I keep paying them? Yada yada yada. Truth of the matter is that we can and we will for as long as it's possible. But, and there is a huge but here, because we live in what I consider to be a new abnormal, we have to change our business model. We have to adjust it, and we have to get our people to adjust accordingly.
Sure.
It's not even one of those things where we can say, "Hey, let's just tweak our thing." It's like, no, we've got to do this, and we got to do it now. And by the way, we've all got to do it together. It's not one of those optional, Howlett's just going to go out and do his own thing and be crazy. We all have to do a different thing, a different set of things.
Yep.
We all have to do it together, and we all have to agree that it's the right thing to do as well. Which is kind of challenging.
But this is the time when HR needs to earn its crust. That's why organizations have HR functions. And this is the time for people in HR to do the things that they've trained to do. So those procedures that people have come up with for health and safety, for crisis management, and all those things. It's now time to execute on those things and step up and be the expert inside your organization, and call out people that are doing things incorrectly, and work with the organization's leadership to put a plan in place. Understand for instance, understand that if you understand the legal ramifications and options that you have, for instance, in terms of payroll loans and how you're going to pay people, and how you're going to structure compensation and furloughing, and all the different legal requirements are different by country. And you need to be, as HR, you need to be on top of those, guiding your organization and finance and others that are looking at those things. But also, I think we've talked in HR Tech, we've talked for the last 3 years about employee engagement and employee experience and all these topics, and they've kind of been a bit wishy-washy, nice to have. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could communicate more effectively with our employees? Whereas now that becomes critical, and the processes and procedures you put in place to get the right information to people, to make them feel comfortable. And if there is bad news, then how do you communicate that? How do you communicate? How do you communicate the fact that a colleague's died? How do you actually put that message together and communicate it to the rest of the employees? And these are very difficult things. And so HR is in a position now that it really needs to step up. Same for things like workforce analytics. We've been talking about workforce planning and workforce analytics for years, yet many of these things have not been taken that seriously. And now we're in a situation where actually organizations that do have a good understanding of their workforce are going to be in a supremely better position than those that are trying to assemble Excels and things on the fly.
Thomas, as somebody who looks at or has looked at HR from the outside, I've tended to view it as much more of an administrative function than anything else, right? Mm-hmm. Or at least that's what I've seen.
Right.
Now, the administrative side of things is fairly straightforward. We have rules, we have regulations, we've got to deal with it, right? Hire, fire, retire, all that sort of stuff. Do you not think?
I think many of those things are being...
Correct me, I'm clearly wrong.
Well, many of these things are currently being thrown up in the air. Look, take the UK. They've just, the government's just shifted out the IP35 requirements, by a year. Yep. Just imagine the disruption that causes to contingent labor practices. You find other countries, for instance, like in Germany, for instance, the move to Kurzarbeit, to short-term, where the company reduces the number of hours employees work, and then the state comes in and picks up the and picks up the surplus, and various other countries have implemented sometimes very rapid changes in labor law. These things create tremendous administrative burden and require quite rapid thinking and changing in administrative processes. So most of the time, you're right, administrative processes are pretty standard, but at the moment, these processes I think are changing, are going to be changing daily. The question is, like, for instance, what is a essential worker? In some countries it's very clear what it is an essential worker, but in some places, for instance, like the UK, the government has not been particularly clear at defining what is an essential worker. So many of these things are changing. So business leaders are looking to HR to say what is an essential worker, and then what policies need to change and to adapt to that new law. So, for instance, some companies are moving people onto short work times. What does this mean from a contractual point of view? Overtime goes away, maybe. When in some cases you're being forced to work overtime because you're maybe producing masks or doing something else. So I think for HR, these are massive periods of administrative disruption.
Okay, I stand corrected. But on the other side, I would also argue that there are fresh challenges, or not fresh challenges, but challenges that have become more important, right? In the sense that, if I think about what's happened over the last few weeks, the number one sense that I've come across in talking to people is one of being in shock in a way that they've never had to experience in their work life before, right?
Indeed.
And how do you deal with that? What is it that you say to people? How do you approach them in a way that isn't going to put them into further shock?
Yes.
What do you do when an employee turns around to you and says, like in our case, for example, that my wife's got to self-isolate for 12 weeks, okay?
Yes.
And we've never had to deal with that before, right? I mean, what do you do in those circumstances? What do you say to HR people in this situation? I mean, there's going to be a variety of these kind of problems, but what does HR need to do at this point in time, would you say?
Well, if you look where HR's come from, a lot of the people that work in HR have come from a psychology background.
Sure.
And I think it's time to remember, those things that we studied in psychology, things like psychological safety and so on, and to apply, the rigorous research and backgrounds, and information that people have developed in these kind of areas. That's one of the kids. So again, I think we have to step up and apply the rigorous research that HR has in these areas, and not make stuff as we go, not make stuff as we're going along. So a good example of that is what you do about tracking. And it's pretty easy to spin up a screen that employees can track who's sick and who's not. But I think that's a really dumb idea.
Why? Why is that a dumb idea?
Well, one, what does it help? First question. Second question is there's a bunch of laws and rules around health data, right, that exist for a reason, right? And pandemic or not, there's human rights issues, there's privacy issues, there's a bunch of other things that revolve around about health data. So don't just willy-nilly start tracking things for the sake of tracking them because you think there's a good idea. Again, go back to the research, go back to the solid foundations and build on that rather than making shit up.
Do you not think, though, that because we're in a health crisis, that perhaps the rules and regulations, well-intentioned and well-meaning though they almost always are, might need a degree of suspension or modification in order that the global scientific network can better understand what it's dealing with? What do you think?
I actually think the opposite. I think, if you look, for instance, at GDPR, there's a recital in GDPR specifically for procedures for handling epidemics. There's actually a set of, within GDPR, there are procedures and so on that are defined for dealing with epidemics. So I think the law is actually pretty good for these things, and that's in part what it's there for. And so, I don't feel like a lot of these things should be thrown out. Partly because when this goes away, this is getting a bit philosophical here. The controls don't go away; they stay, right? So, for instance, if you suddenly start introducing, ID cards, or for instance, in the UK they don't have ID cards. If you suddenly use this as a reason to introduce ID cards, then do you think when the virus is gone, the government's going to delete all that data and say, okay, well, no more ID cards, thanks very much, we just needed them for the virus? Of course, those methods of control and surveillance will continue. So there is a need to balance these things out. And what I hear is the people who mainly suggesting that, we don't need any laws and rules for these things, are the people that don't understand the laws and rules in the first place. There are very good ways of helping employees deal with the challenges of the virus without us putting in place a whole bunch of unnecessary tracking processes from the employer. So, in other words, if government comes to you and says, look, we need you to track the following information in the following way, then of course we should do it. But what I'm arguing against is that employers themselves imagining tracking mechanisms and tracking regimes before the health authorities have suggested them, and don't do these things on a whim. Work with your health officer, work with your data protection officer, and design put procedures in place that are firstly going to work, and then secondly are compliant. And it can be done.
Thomas, we've talked about this in the context of GDPR, but what about in the context of America? I mean, we could say all sorts of things about America, but I think this one is pretty sort of important as it relates to that particular country. I mean, the way that I look at it is there's 50-ish states, I suppose there are, and probably 50-ish sets of rules if I'm
more. I think there are over 1,000 distinct pieces of privacy legislation in the US.
Oh my goodness! So what do they do?
Well, I was chatting to an American friend of mine the other day who works in healthcare, and there are pretty clear rules for healthcare data in the US. Healthcare data is one of the areas that's relatively well protected in the US. Excuse me. So those rules there's a regulation called HIPAA and a bunch of others relating to health and safety, OSHA, and a whole bunch of other regulations on health and safety data. So again, I'd urge organizations that are looking to track data about employee infections and so on to do it based on the guidance that's coming from those authorities. But if in doubt with healthcare information, again, imagine it was your data. The basic principle I would suggest with data protection is imagine it was your data. How would you want that data to be used? And normally if you think like that, or how would you want the data of your children to be used, or how would you want the data of your parents to be used? If you personalize it, then 9 times out of 10 you'll probably end up at the point of what the law is saying anyway. But talk to experts. There are experts. There are people that can help you on things like like HIPAA and applied regulations, and there are good procedures in place through things like OSHA for tracking injury, sick days, and all those kind of stuff. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. these procedures and processes are in place already, just use them.
Is there anything in your view that HR could be doing now, could be usefully doing, that maybe it's not doing at the moment, or would you think otherwise?
I think that the primary thing that HR, a couple of things that I'd say that HR organizations do. One, make sure that they're on top of the administrative processes. Pay people correctly, pay them on time. If their bonuses due, that were due from last year or whatever, make sure that they're paid on time. Make sure that the administrative processes function really in a really effective way. Because people will be stressed if people will be overly stressed if administrative processes fail. Sure. at this point in time. Also, make sure that you're on top of any changes in rules and structures in terms of pay contracts and right to work and other things that come in place on the back of this. So if governments are providing funding, or if people are in essential work and so on, be really on top of the complexities and challenges of that, and that will change by day and that will change by country. So one of the things I'd also urge HR leaders to do is, there is no global response, right? The responses are by country. That's what we're dealing with. So what may very well be a very appropriate communication form in the US may not be the appropriate communication protocols in Germany or in France or in Hungary or in Taiwan or in wherever. So make sure that when you're communicating, a position, that you're actually doing it in a way that is conformant with the regulations and cultures and rules and so on in the countries in which you do business. Now is not the time to impose a head office practice at a country level, because each country is having to deal with this differently in different timings and different rules and so on. So adapt your processes to the countries, and then so that's the administrative side. But make sure that your communications practices are effective. Make sure that they're reaching the employees. Make sure that the employees have a mechanism to reach you, to get the help that they need, to get the information they need to reassure them. And then also, I think there's a strategic workforce planning opportunity here as well. So the classic position that I remind people is, measure twice, cut once, right? And the gut reaction in these times is, cost saving, restructure, cost save, cut. But as HR, you have to start thinking about the strategic long-term implications for the workforce, and be able to model out, use your modeling tools that you've invested in recently, and make sure that you don't simply go with the good old-fashioned spreadsheet cut model, but actually that you apply some scenario planning and you apply some strategy to your workforce planning scenarios, so that as we come out of this, that you're actually getting your organization in a position that it can succeed. And the short-term drive to cut may not actually be the best thing, but you have the tools, you have the mechanisms now to do that planning. So step up and do the strategic workforce planning to help the rest of the board plan for the future.
Okay, so I see a variety of scenarios here. So, for example, in some industries, food, logistics, healthcare, it's quite clear that those industries are going to thrive under these circumstances because we all need them, right?
Yeah.
Whereas there are a whole bunch of industries, transportation, hospitality are obviously the two big come to mind things, which are getting totally crushed at this point in time. So there's everything in between. My brother prosaically is saying to me, "Can I go into my workshop to continue building ukuleles?" and there's a discussion with his landlord about who else is going to be in the building. You know, these sort of minutiae things that you take for granted on a day-to-day basis suddenly become incredibly important. But I wonder the extent to which we can plan. In my view, we've been through a period of chaos. Yeah, some of us have got through it and are moving on and trying to figure out what's next. Some of us are still in that fairly chaotic thing. Some governments have done perhaps better, quote unquote, than others in helping their people, and some are left kind of partially stranded. I mean, I was talking to somebody last evening about the situation in California, where it's unclear as to what they can and cannot do, and so on. So, I mean, it's bloody awful from that perspective. But let's assume for one moment that we move through. You know, we get past the shock. We're all locked up. So what? Everybody's in that same kind of boat. Is it realistic to plan for the future, or do we have to say, look, we have to reframe? Because from my perspective, I'm looking at this and thinking timeline is at least 6 to 9 months before there's any return to what passes as normal. Yeah, that's a very long time, as far as I'm concerned, at least in this current environment. But I think it represents an opportunity to reframe what it is that we do. So, is this something that you would recommend, or is this something that you think, no, that's fanciful?
Oh, I think, scenario planning is precisely about this sort of, this sort of situation. So, being able to have multiple, scenarios and then, plan to those scenarios makes a whole lot of sense. What we don't know is, what scenario is going to come. So that's the whole point of doing scenario planning, is that, we have these extremes, so the time to plan is when there is uncertainty, because you need to have options defined, so that when there is a chance to move quickly, you've thought through the different options, and you're then able to take a route forward. So I'd say now is precisely a time to start to be doing that. Now we have to be completely tactical and all the rest of it, but I think there is organizations that use this as an opportunity to rethink and replan and ask themselves questions about, what business are you in? So, one of the things you probably find is that there's a lot of stuff that you thought you needed that you suddenly realize you don't, and maybe services, it may be, or there may be other things that you realize that are much more important that you'd neglected. And you feel that in your personal life, I'm sure. But I think businesses will do the same. So I think many service chains and supply chains are going to be, even in the best possible future scenarios, I don't think anything's going to remain the same. A lot of things are going to change quite dramatically. And look, and as we all sit here in our comfortable houses, slightly irritated that we can't go out watching Netflix, I'd say let's spare a thought for the people that are, or more than a thought, but let's think about the people who perhaps don't have a home, or whose home doesn't have electricity or doesn't have running water. And I think we need to think about this as a global crisis, not just as a first world thing. And I think we need to think seriously going forward, how are we going to help people who are living in slums and shacks and so on in this world, because we all have it, we all think it's tough, and we all worried about cash flows and all the rest of it. But we have roofs over our houses, we have roofs over our head, and we have food in our belly. So maybe it's not that bad.
That's a really interesting point there, Thomas. Because I mean, you're English, but you lived in South Africa, or you were brought up in South Africa, something like that.
I grew up in South Africa. So I live in Germany. So I support the Germans for football, the South Africans for rugby and cricket, and the English for snooker.
Well, we won't go in that direction. But I visited South Africa a couple of times, and Cape Town, as you know,
Yeah,
and these were in completely different times.
sure.
And even then, I found it heartbreaking to know that my bar bill for one evening would likely be the equivalent of a month's wages for the person actually serving me those drinks and stuff. And the conditions under which those people have had to live for a long, long time. So that's one thing that I'm thinking about. Another thing is Vijay, a mutual friend of ours, Vijay Sankar, is talking about, even locally, his mother lives in a relatively well-off area of India, and the milk guy can't deliver, so he has no income. The bread guy can't deliver. And these other people that depend on what to us seem to be, it's happening, and they can't. And what do we do? We can't do anything, but I suggest that now is probably a very good time to be thinking about some sort of global social contract, if that's even possible. But at least think about it and recognise that there are genuine problems. Oops, you just lost your ear.
As you can tell, I haven't quite got the setup right yet. But I think there are opportunities, for us to ask big questions. I think when one looks, sorry, I'm back. Yeah. So when we look at the climate change, for instance, and you start to see photos of cities that were massively polluted before, where people can suddenly see the sky, and people who are having asthma problems can now breathe properly. So I think that it does allow us to do many forms of reset here. Again, I'm being speculative here, but I think when we see what happens when on the climate change side of it, I think we see the potential for human intervention to solve climate change, and this is just a small little window, almost a positive externality, if you like, if you're looking for one in these times, is the climate impact of this economic of the complete slowdown. But I all of us in the West, I know or in developed countries, this is painful. This is it's challenging and all the rest of it. But I think for people in developing countries, I don't really like the term, but this is going to be so much tougher. And if you take the example of South Africa, I think again, I'm not an expert here, but the government has moved quickly and coherently to put in a lockdown and so on. I think probably more effectively than anyone could have expected. So there's some positive movements coming there, and if we look at how it's been brought around the world, this is a disease that has been spread by wealthy people.
Oh yes.
So and it's now going to wreak havoc on people that are not so well off. So I think we need to spare a thought for those people.
Sure. Thomas, let's just switch a little bit, because you have a little announcement that you made yesterday, you cheeky little monkey, as we say up north. As probably the 3-4 people that know me on this call, I run an advisory firm helping in HR tech, and I have 3 main constituents: people that use HR tech, people that build HR tech, and people that invest in HR tech. And I've always sort of had the view that for some things I'm an expert in, and people come to me for advice on those things, but other things you'll normally know somebody else in the world who's clever on that particular topic than I am. So what I want to do is I want to bring those people together. And so I've been talking about this a little while, and one of the areas which I've seen that many software companies have a problem with is in marketing.
specifically the gap between, on the one hand, I think a lot of companies can come up with a nice high-level brand and have good product, but then there's peace in the middle in terms of how do you effectively communicate about that product, and how do you actually execute on marketing, and execute on marketing well. This marketing, when it's done well, is a positive thing. Marketing, when it's done badly, is a swear word. And about 10 years, at least 10 years ago, I met Rachel when I was a gardener, and she was working for a Page Up People, which is a Australian HR tech vendor. And she was like a super smart, super on the board, super engaged. And we stayed in touch over the years. And, she worked at Workday for a long time. She was there for about 9 years. And then, she went traveling around the world, and then she was looking for the next thing to do. And I said, well, why don't we do some work together? And so that's really what we're doing. So for HR tech companies that want marketing advice, we now have somebody that actually really knows how to provide that advice, and we're planning a whole bunch of services aimed at making tech marketing better, HR tech marketing better, less fluff and more results. So I'm really excited about it, and it's going to be fun. And let's see where it goes. But I'm super excited to be working with her. She's. I'll say to you straight up, Thomas. I am so pleased that somebody has finally done that, because the biggest challenge that we find in our business is several challenges. As far as I'm concerned, there are two types of marketing people: those who are creative and those who execute. Now, some people will argue with me about this, but I've only ever seen those two types. Yeah, I have seen one person who, to my mind, was kind of like a hybrid, who was kind of imaginative and kind of capable of execution. But to my mind, that's how the world of marketing is. Okay, and tech marketing in particular is bloody awful 99% of the time. It's done on a formula. It's, they think that certain things work. They're wedded to ludicrous advertising ideas. Why would you advertise in an airport right at the moment, for example? Yeah. And we have to do it. Why? Well, we have to do it, but why? And I can't get an answer. Of course, there's nobody in the airports now, right? So there's your answer straight away. Yeah. And assuming that you have to push messages to people all the time. We have to tell them. We have to hang on a minute. How about listening to what they have to say, and understanding what they need? Yeah. I mean, the thing that we say to our partners at the moment is, you may not realize this because you've been so used to pushing messages. You need to listen, and you need to listen really, really hard, because if you don't, they will find true love elsewhere. I'll get off my soapbox for a moment, but I'm sure you understand what I'm saying. And I think what we see also is that often the smaller companies, they'll hire a smart person who has a B2C background, and that person will need coaching on what's the differences between B2C and B2B, and Rachel's going to be awesome at that. The other thing I think where we see a huge opportunity, speaking to the vendors here, is that typically the smaller vendors, you need to collaborate and work effectively with the bigger ones, and that's tough to do. And so one of the services I'm pitching services here, but one of the things we see as a great opportunity is, I know the SAP ecosystem really, really well, and Rachel knows the Workday ecosystem really well. So between us, we cover off two of the major ecosystems, so that for vendors looking to figure out how to work with SAP, then I'm pretty good at that. Vendors that are looking to work, figure out how to work with Workday, then Rachel probably has no peer there as well. So that combination, I think, is going to be pretty interesting.
What other things are you thinking about at this moment in time as it relates to what Rachel's going to be doing?
Well, we're going to see. I mean, really we're just kicking it off. But we put the announcement out yesterday, and we're already seeing people contacting us and so on. So basically, we'll listen to the customers and understand what they want, and we'll be guided by that. If we advise vendors to listen to their customers, then our job first and foremost is to listen to ours. So, but I also see it being useful in terms of the work we're doing with the investor community as well. Been doing a lot of work recently with companies that invest in HR tech. So PE firms, VC firms, other firms doing acquisitions and so on. And I think having a strong marketeer involved in advice will provide another dimension to the advice that we can give to those firms as well. So
I love what you've just said, because I was on a webinar yesterday with a guy, I don't know if you know him or not, Michael Troller in Denmark, who has he's the current public face of Dreams and Details, that thing that Jim Schnauer talked about. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. I love Jim's perspective on this thing, and if you don't know what I'm talking about,
he's
then
one of the good guys. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, people, then I'll certainly put a link on. But he says now is not the time to be planning. Now is the time, because we can't literally plan. And I mean, you just said that I can't plan, right? But what I can do is have an ambition, which is to provide the kind of thing that you're talking about to organizations, and that evolves into plans and all the rest of it over time. I couldn't have known that you would have said that, which is amazing, really. And those connections and those networks are going to become increasingly important, aren't they? We've always said that they're important, but now I think they're probably more important than any other time. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think, and it goes back to my original philosophy, which is, I want to bring the best expertise to my customers, and sometimes, hopefully, that expertise is me, but a lot of times it's not. And if I know somebody who knows more about something than I do, which is most of the time, then I should bring that person to the party, and that's the way I've always tried to work. And working with Rachel, I think, is just going to be the next step in that. But there are other plans coming as well. So,
do you want to say anything about those other plans, or are they evil plans that you need to keep secret?
No, it's not so much keep the secret, but in a similar way that I'm working with Rachel, I've couple of other people I'm talking to about doing the same, the same sort of services. So I have some, really deep expertise on GDPR that I know that I'd like to bring to customers. Whereas I know a fair bit about GDPR, I don't consider myself to be an expert. I'd rather bring, specific expertise there. Also, there's a couple of other areas like that where I've identified people that I'd like to work with in a similar way to what I'm working with Rachel. But one step at a time, and let's see how it goes. Yeah.
And now, I guess, is a very good time to be thinking about opportunities in this context, isn't it? I mean, how many people at the moment are saying, "Hey, I'm expanding my business." You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. It is, obviously there are risks involved with that, but I think just because there's a crisis doesn't mean that good people disappear. So and actually, I think it's an opportunity now for to be a little bit bold and to take a bit of a risk.
Okay, what is the one thing that you would ask HR people to do at this moment in time that maybe they're not doing, other than wash their hands? I mean, that's
hopefully everyone's doing the wash your hands bit. I think the main thing now is cut people a bit of slack. I think many organizations are doing that, and cut people where you can, believe in the best of people, and your people will most people really want to work. Most people really want to succeed, and so I think if we, believe in the good side of human nature, then err on the side of the good side of human nature rather than on being draconian. And, I think we'll all come out of this better.
Thomas, for the purposes of this conversation, that is a fantastic place to stop, because I love positive messages at this moment in time. I know I have a reputation for being a curmudgeon, but hey, we got to be positive now, right?
And you're looking very, 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 very well manicured for a it's kind of like there's this curve between need to do the maths here on Dennis's well, you're looking manicured, but you're looking manicured.
as opposed to being a scruffy bugger is what you really want to say, isn't it, Thomas?
Who would I be to say that, Dennis? Yeah. Indeed. But it's lovely to see you.
And you, sir. And you, sir.